Have you ever met anyone whose life experiences were different enough from yours that it made you wonder how they accomplished various aspects of their life? Throughout the course of my life, I have had the privilege of getting to know many people of the disabled community through the children's hospital I attended as a child and trips that they would take me on. And then later, through my experiences as a member of the United States sitting volleyball team that won a bronze medal in the Paralympics. So, of course, I am naturally drawn to other members of the disabled community who are looking to improve outcomes or to shine a light on disparities that exist for disabled people when it comes to birth and lactation. That is why I was so thrilled to have this conversation with Kelsey Cooper, who herself is a member of the disabled community and who has started a podcast called Disabled Birth Stories. We discussed what she has heard from guests of her podcast as it relates to the care they received in the perinatal period, and more specifically, honing in on their experiences trying to feed their babies. We also had the opportunity to discuss her own disability and what she might be thinking of when she is in the position to be breastfeeding that could make her experience less stressful, help her to feel more supported, and feel more prepared to make the adjustments needed to successfully feed a baby. So welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, an international board-certified lactation consultant and a childbirth educator on a mission to shine a light on the disparities that make feeding our babies so difficult. Enjoy.
I am Kelsey Cooper. I host Disabled Birth Stories podcast, which we feature physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, and also chronic illness for anyone who wants to tell their story. Because I felt like once I got married, I wanted to look into what birth and pregnancy would look like for someone who's disabled. I have a disability myself, and so I couldn't really find much as far as resources and things like that. And I loved Birth Story podcast, so I was like, why don't I just do it myself? So I did.
That's awesome.
So
how many episodes in are you now?
We just did our 10th, I want to say.
Okay.
We do once a month birth stories for now. We may increase that as we get more people. So once a month, the last Saturday of the month. As I get them, I prop in some people in the birth world, birth workers that can speak to disability and what they do, and people who work with disabilities as well.
How hard or easy has it been to find people who work with disabled people in the perinatal period who actually have something valuable to add to the conversation? Has that been easier or harder than you expected?
I expected there to be some challenges just because, connecting with people with disabilities or finding them, I knew would probably be tough. So it's slightly harder than I expected, but we've made it work so far.
Yeah, that's great. And as you got married and were thinking about birth yourself, what were the types of resources that you were looking for that you couldn't?
Just how would a obstetrician treat someone with a disability differently? Does their medical care shift according to a disability? And was there any research on my specific disability or disabilities in general? What was their game plan going into treating someone with a disability? Do they view them any differently as far as the way they treat them medically? And do they prepare in a different way? So just things like that.
All right. And will you share with me what your disability is?
Sure. I have cerebral palsy. My classification is spastic diplegia. So my muscles are tight and it mostly affects me from my hips down, although I do have some dexterity issues with my hands.
Okay. And do you use mobility devices?
I don't. I did when I was younger. I used orthotics, AFOs. I get around pretty well. I have some balance and coordination issues, but I compensate well.
Yeah, that's great. And have you met people with cerebral palsy who have gone through pregnancy and given birth and entered motherhood to be able to discuss what their experiences were?
I actually found a group on Facebook called Mommies with Cerebral Palsy, and I've chatted with them, and that's where I've gotten a couple of my interviewees from, and so I'm able to. It's for people who are pregnant or wanting to become pregnant, and so I was able to join and chat with people there.
Okay, and so as you have gotten to know them, what are the things that you are hearing from people with your specific disability about how their treatment has varied for their prenatal, pregnancy, and postpartum?
I've noticed that I don't know if this is just in the community or from obstetricians, they automatically want to treat them as, and not always, but a lot of them want to treat them as a high risk immediately. And from the research that we've done in the group and from what I've seen, like you don't automatically become high risk because of the cerebral palsy. There may be some co-disabilities or co-issues, co-health things that cause you to be high risk, but as far as we know, cerebral palsy itself doesn't cause that. So that's a misconception there. And then uh, a lot of wheelchair users who have cerebral palsy have said things like they can't weigh me, which is normal in a medical. They can't get my proper weight. They don't have a proper exam table, things like that. Those are just a few things that I've.
That is really interesting to think about, that when going to see their primary care provider for pregnancy and birth, that there isn't even a way for them to comfortably be on a table and be examined. And it's a little bit surprising, given all of the ADA requirements, that healthcare systems have not found a way to ensure that this is easily navigated, that when somebody comes in to the office for an appointment, that there's even a specific room that has a different setup. Have you looked to see if there are any companies, durable medical equipment companies, providing obstetric furniture and obstetric tools that are more geared towards the disability community?
Not specifically. I myself, when I went to just a yearly checkup, they mentioned that they have a table that was lower and more accessible, but it was in a different office, so I'd have to go to a different location. But I haven't looked into that specifically. And one of my interviews with Alicia Thomas, she mentioned that when she went to her obstetric appointments, when she first went, there was tables that were accessible, and then the next appointment she went and she said, "Where did the exam tables go?" Like they were gone, and they said, "Well, oh, they were too expensive, so we got rid of them."
What? That
Yeah,
is bizarre. I mean, they already
yeah,
have them.
yeah. So I don't know if they were renting them or whatever, but that's something she mentioned on her episode of the podcast.
Now, I want to get into hearing some experiences of milk making, lactation. But before we do, I just want to give a quick anecdote, which is that most of my listeners know that I have a physical disability. And when I gave birth to my first, um, I didn't expect that my disability would impact me in any way.
Mhm.
It's congenital. It wasn't even something I expected my healthcare provider to bring up or ask questions about. However, I ended up being induced, and because I was on IV fluids for 3 days, the saline really made me swell. I had to take off my prosthetic, and then I could not wear it for about 2 weeks, as a new mom in the early postpartum period trying to care for an infant. And the thing that was interesting to me about this experience is, as the patient, yes, we do have to advocate for ourselves. And we cannot always anticipate the ways in which our disability is going to impact us. But what we should be able to expect from our healthcare providers is that when they encounter somebody who has a body difference, an intellectual difference, that they dig into the research themselves to understand what factors might come up so that they
Mhm.
are able to accommodate as needed. So I'm wondering, as you have gathered stories from people, have you heard positive experiences of people being cared for by providers who were able to do their research, figure out how to best accommodate and make changes in the moment? Or does it feel like most of the time the person is required to do the work themselves to be treated properly?
From what I've found, it's the person having to advocate, or um, one of the interviews I did recently, she mentioned I advocate for myself, but I also pass that off to my husband because sometimes I get stressed, or so it's self advocating and then having family to back you up when you don't know what do you do when you're in pain and you can't speak for yourself. So it's a lot of self advocating for sure, and it's rare to find a medical provider who goes above that to figure it out ahead of time or make any changes.
Yeah, so let's move into talking about lactation. Tell me, have you done any research on lactation as it relates to cerebral palsy yourself?
Not really. I've looked into it a little bit, but it's hard to find, and so I don't really have anywhere to go or what I found really.
Um, okay, so tell me have you, in the group that you're in and in your interviews, as you've talked to other people, what are the experiences that you're hearing when it comes to the help that people are getting with lactation? Have you heard stories about how they were treated by lactation consultants, or trying to figure out milk supply issues, or trying to figure out ways that they can hold their baby in ways that are comfortable for both them and the baby? What are some of the stories that you have heard that have made you think about how this might get improved?
Mm, From mostly what I've heard is in the hospital setting, they seem willing to help and there to help, but figuring out how to help can be a little. They're not sure. And also in an interview with my interview with Gabby, she mentioned that she knew like immediately herself that she needed a nipple shield, and her lactation consultant was like, "Well, I don't think you need that." And she was like, "I should have listened to my gut." And then they would say, "Well, can you hold the baby this way? You should hold the baby this way." And she was like, I can't do that. My hands are affected by my disability. I can't do that." And so she mentioned trying to explain that and get people to understand, trying to figure out alternatives to the typical football hold or the typical holds.
Yeah, that is really important. And regardless of whether or not somebody has a disability, body shape and size can really impact how comfortable a person is feeding a baby. And a good lactation consultant is not going to give everybody the same holds. They're going to give choices. They're going to ask what feels comfortable, what doesn't feel comfortable. It is so important to work collaboratively. And I think something that any person who is a birth worker needs to hear is it is okay to ask questions and to get feedback. So, is this working for you? What isn't working for you? How can we get creative here? Because you can bring your expertise of lactation to the table, but the person you are working with brings their expertise of their own body. And being able to align that together is going to bring better results. Have you heard stories of people who were able to successfully breastfeed and meet all of their goals despite their disability?
Yes, there's quite a few, especially in the groups that I'm in. It may take some learning curves, and it's learning curves for anyone, but
Mhm.
but yeah, I've definitely found people who were successful for a year plus.
Yeah. Have you heard of instances in which mobility was limited in some way? So, for instance, it may be hard to hold the baby to your body, and people have come up with creative accommodations to be able to get baby latched comfortably.
Yeah, I've heard of them laying in the bed and scooting the baby to them, so that they don't have to get up, and even if, the baby in a a bassinet next to the bed, they're at least able to lift them from the bassinet to the bed and then scoot them and use the bed to their advantage, or bed and pillows combination to get them where they need to be. Sure.
And have you heard of any special tools that have been created, special types of carriers or wraps or pillows that seem to work better for people with limited upper body mobility specifically?
Not in the sense of breastfeeding that I've came across. So, there's been some for wheelchair users for their strap, for their lap. They have a lap strap for themselves for the baby, and then frontal carriers seem to uh, be helpful a lot from what I've heard from disabled community. It kind of puts the weight where they need it. They can adjust the baby as they need and have the baby right there. So that may help with breastfeeding as well, having them close to the chest, and a carrier. I've heard that the body carriers help a lot.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I could imagine that using a carrier for feeding once you sometimes that takes a little bit of
Figure it out.
right, it takes a little bit of
Yeah.
time to get comfortable with your baby and your new body and navigating your breast, but even people without limited mobility tend to say that if they can figure out nursing with a carrier, that it does help them to feel more, like they're not just stuck to the couch all the time.
Right.
So one of the things that I imagine would be really difficult is perhaps needing extra.
Mhm.
Sometimes people with limited mobility may need somebody else around to help them latch their baby, especially in the beginning. As the baby becomes a little more independent, then they can kind of do more of the work to get onto the. Have you heard of cases in which a partner is granted more leave so that they can stay around for longer because the breastfeeding parent has a disability? Or what are creative ways that you have heard of people ensuring that somebody else can be around to help feed the baby?
There are ways that you can hire. I've heard of people hiring help, whether it be like a nighttime doula or even someone to come into the home, that they already have or need those people in place to help them day to day. So they find someone that has breastfeeding experience or something that they can bring into the home and help them that way.
Yeah, and postpartum doulas are great for that. And it may be that your insurance could cover some of them, especially if you have the extra disability needs. Are there organizations that you have found that specifically focus on lactating or disabled people that you feel like put out good information?
They That's what I've been, trying to find. I've learned that other countries have a lot. I found a lot of disability related help and resources in Australia and England. I go down deep dives in what they provide, but as far as that specifically, not really. Yeah.
Yeah, I was doing some just Googling to see what came up when you put in lactating with disability, breastfeeding and disability mothers, breastfeeding, put in a
Yeah.
variety of search terms. And there are some studies, peer reviewed published
Mhm.
studies, but when you look at how many participants there are, or the range of disabilities, or how they parse out the disability, it's clear that there is a lot more research that needs to be done. Well, everyone deserves to be able to feed their baby in the ways that they would like to. But if there's not the research and support available, then that makes it more challenging. Have you had a chance to meet with an IBCLC or a lactation professional educator as you have started to learn about how pregnancy and the postpartum period will impact you?
Not one-on-one or anything like that, no.
Okay, all right. So as you think about what baby feeding might be like for you, are there questions that come to mind that you would like to have answered or that you have wondered about?
Um, I think, a lot of it is to do with the dexterity in my hands, and wondering what would be alternatives to hold, positions that would potentially work for me. Of course, you don't know until you try.
Tell me a little bit about how the dexterity in your hands impacts you. Do you fatigue? Is it hard to move them? What is that experience like for you?
There's definitely fatigue at time, just fatigue in general, but is even in my limbs. And then making certain movements, it can be tough. Just there's a stiffness sometimes. So, but as far as like grip, I have my grip is fine, and using them in a general sense is fine. But I don't know until I try it, and then I'm like, oh, that doesn't really work. But
And is there
it
anything
kind
that
of makes
makes the stiffness better or worse, or the dexterity better or worse?
Not that I've found. It's usually, like, either from it gets worse from fatigue, like I said, just, all body fatigue or, overuse. Any part of my body overuse makes the stiffness or anything worse. But as far as making it better, just rest, as far as I can tell.
I'm watching you on the video, so I see that your hands are quite mobile. You would be able to
Mhm.
manipulate your breast and hold it, squeeze if you needed to, or create compressions in order to help get a wide latch or help milk come out if needed.
Yes. As far as I, know, but, my I'm right hand dominant and my left people have trouble with their less dominant hand, but it's even less because of the disability, so I'd have to figure out, like, which hand I could do what with, but I think it would be possible.
Awesome. So you've already mentioned one position that would probably be really, really great for you, which is that side lying position, laying on your side in the bed, one arm kind of propping your head up and then bringing baby in really tight. And then often you can put something behind the baby, like a firm pillow, not where their head would be, but lower down towards their butt, or a rolled up towel that prevents the baby from rolling away from you so that you don't even have to hold baby to you. So that would be a great position. And then I can send you a link later. Nancy Moorbacher is an IBCLC, a breastfeeding researcher. She has videos on YouTube and on her website. She teaches other IBCLCs, and she has great videos of what we call biological breastfeeding or laid back breastfeeding. And it is essentially
Hmm.
where you're laying. Typically, you don't want to be flat on your back, but you're at an incline. Think of the position you might be in if you were in a recliner. So you can accomplish that by being in a recliner or just by scooting your butt out and kind of propped up on the back with pillows. And when you do that and you have enough pillows supporting your arms so that you're not having to like hold them up, you can lay baby right on your body. And then they are able to almost even latch themselves, and then your hands are free, or you can kind of rest them on the baby. And this position is really good because babies have touch points there in their hands and their feet and their stomach that trigger their wide latching response. So when baby is laying on top of you like that, it helps baby to latch better, and you are able to rest more during those feeding times. So, reviewing some of those videos and then knowing the language when you deliver to talk to supporters to say, listen, I'm going to need to reduce fatigue in my upper body. I really want to try side lying and I really want to try laid back breastfeeding. Um, would be a great way to set yourself up to knowing that there are a couple of positions that might really work for you. And that might be the case for other people in your community of listeners and followers as well.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Any other questions that you've had related to lactation?
This may be like debunking myths or whatever you would call it, but as far as like chest size, does that affect lactation?
The most basic answer is no. However, there is something called insufficient glandular tissue, IGT, and typically the breasts are more like tubular and a little wider apart. So they might only have like a triangular shape, and then there's a big space in between the chest. So this means that during puberty, for whatever reason, the mammary glands did not fully develop. And so there is less mammary tissue in the breast to begin with. And sometimes when somebody has IGT, they may have a lower milk supply. But if breasts have sufficient glandular tissue, then it doesn't matter if they're really big or really small. Nipple size doesn't matter as well. So often somebody might have really small breasts, but they actually have tons of mammary glands in the breast. And so they're able to produce tons of milk, or they might have a large storage capacity, meaning their baby can take in a lot at once and they might feed a little less frequently. Whereas somebody might have huge breasts, but most of the tissue is fatty tissue, not mammary tissue. So they may have fewer mammary glands and therefore would need to feed way more frequently. So size really has nothing to do with the amount of milk a person can produce, as long as you aren't dealing with a hormonal issue like IGT.
And as far as the research on lactation and disability, does a specific disability or disabilities you've heard of affect production of milk?
So women with spinal cord injury at or above T6 sometimes have reduced milk supply or end up feeding for less time. Um, and there is actually a group for people breastfeeding with spinal cord injury. I don't know if you've encountered this or not. It's called Breastfeeding Following Spinal Cord Injury, SCIRE community. So that can be the case. Also, sometimes if there are autoimmune disorders that somebody is dealing with, then that impacts hormones and we can see a reduction in milk supply. The other thing is that if there has ever been trauma to the breast, like if the person's disability um, was due to an accident and the breast or the chest was hit really hard, that can sometimes impact the ability of the mammary glands to produce milk or hold milk. So I always go through a full history with people. I want to know any surgeries they've had. Sometimes somebody has had a reduction or a augmentation. And if somebody has had an augmentation, then I want to know, what did your breasts look like before? What made you feel like you needed an augmentation? Because that might give us clues as to why somebody's breastfeeding may be impacted. Have you had people on your podcast talk about pumping?
Mm, Not specifically on the podcast. That is something I wanted to address. Is there anything that you would advise someone to do differently or things like that?
Yeah. I think that's going to vary individual to individual, just like anything in healthcare. But I would
Mhm.
definitely have make sure that you have a way to keep the phalanges attached to your body without having to hold them up, especially if your muscles fatigue or you have limited use of your hands or arms, because the phalanges from a wall pump, a double electric pump, they don't stay on themselves. But there are like special bras you can buy that are like $70 that zip up and zip on and off, or you can just use like a nursing bra to clip them on, or you can take like an old sports bra and just cut holes in them, and the phalanges can stick through there. Most of the time, I recommend double electric wall pumps over wearable pumps. However, if somebody has limited mobility or fatigues really easily, and pumping using a double electric wall pump is going to be difficult or restrictive or mean that the person pumps less frequently, then that might be a situation in which I suggest somebody try a wearable pump to see if they are able to pump more frequently or fatigue less often. But I would definitely work with an IBCLC to get proper phalange sizing for either type of pump. So, as you think about the stories that you have heard people share or the chatter amongst the disability community and the Facebook groups that you are in, what are the key takeaways that you hope that anyone supporting people in the perinatal period or anyone who themselves is disabled, has an autoimmune disorder, has chronic health difficulties, which make them scared about maybe caring for a baby and the lack of sleep and all of those things. What are the key takeaways that you really feel like people should go into this period knowing so that they can feel really good about their entrance into parenthood?
I would say that there are resources out there, that there are people who have done this, that just because you're disabled or have some other health issue doesn't mean that you can't be a parent, or it's impossible for you. Eh, you may have to do things differently or make adjustments or adapt things differently than you thought you originally would, even adapt them post once the baby's here and realize, I thought this would work, but it doesn't. Um, and just know that you can do it if with research and resources, that there are things out there that make it possible.
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted to just close out by asking if you have heard experiences in which people who are in disabled bodies, people who are disabled, have gotten pushback from friends or family members or strangers about becoming parents, and how you have heard people deal with this form of discrimination.
Yeah, I think I hear it a lot in the groups that I'm in and in the disability community in general. I think from my own experience with disability and things like that, it's just standing your ground. You don't owe anyone anything. So you could just say, well, I'm going to do it, whether you like it or not. I have resources. You can say, these are the resources that I found. You can give them the information that you have. I'm doing my own research, and I'm educating myself and preparing myself and adapting as needed. I think it comes down to education, and they don't mean it a lot of times, not always, but they don't mean it in a negative sense. As sad as it is, we have to educate, and even educating our friends and family, and that we're capable, and even this phase of life as well as every other.
And have you had pushback as an individual from friends and family members about your desire to give birth and have children, or have your friends and family been supportive?
I would say they've been pretty supportive. Of course, they have worries and questions as anyone would know. They don't. I think they mostly keep that, to themselves, because they know that it's my life and I'll figure it out eventually. So,
Yeah, and I think your advice that you don't owe anybody any information is so true. There are those times when we know a person is coming to us because they really care about us and they want to have
mhm.
a conversation that is mutually beneficial, or they're coming to us with their own opinions and they're never going to change their mind no matter what. And so it is totally acceptable in any situation, but especially in dealing with matters of starting a family and how you're going to care for your own child, to say, I am not accepting feedback on this topic at this time. We are not discussing it. And that can be hard to do.
I think they they're afraid, so they put their fear on you, and I say, like, I'm not afraid. I got this, and I understand your concerns.
Right. And what person thinking of becoming a parent or entering parenthood isn't afraid? We all have our fears about what that will be like. And you are the person living in your own body. We are the people living in our own body. So we know what we are capable of doing. Do most people in the disability community that you have spoken to who have become parents, is there a mix between whether or not their partner is also disabled, or do you see most of the time that their partner is able-bodied?
I'd say most of the time their partner is able-bodied, and every once in a while I see an also disabled. My husband has cerebral palsy as well, and so when I mention that to people, they're like, "Really? Cool." It's something even in the disability community that doesn't happen as often. So
Yeah, that's fascinating. How did you meet?
a Facebook group actually.
Yeah, amazing. So, do you think his support of you will be enhanced by the fact that he also shares similar challenges, or do you think it will mean that you guys have to solve a bit more to be able to really feel comfortable in the postpartum period?
I think it'll be a little bit of both. The understanding and the reasons why, I think he would understand more than someone else, but also we would have our own adaptations and things to make, since we're both disabled, to make things work. I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, for sure. Well, is there anything else that you feel like it's important to discuss when it comes to lactation, breastfeeding, and the disability community that I haven't thought to ask you or bring up?
Um, Trying to think. But is there anything that could prepare for or help lactation become I don't
A
know the word, but
possibility? Yeah.
just like production wise and things like that.
Yeah. So, the biggest thing that can be done prenatally is, especially during pregnancy, is to go to breastfeeding support groups, whether that is online or in person, see
Mhm.
babies feeding from the body as frequently as possible. And if you can, in your communities that you are in, where people have similar body differences, or accommodations that they might need, even having groups there where you say, "Hey, can we do like a support group and just talk about baby feeding? I'm pregnant." And just being able to see how people are positioning their babies. One of the biggest barriers to successful breastfeeding in the Western world is that so few of us have actually seen up close and personal babies feeding from bodies.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, where can people find you? Where can they find your podcast? If somebody has a story to share, where can they find you to let you know? Give us all the details.
Okay. So you can email me at it's Kelsey Cooper at disabledbirthstories.com. On Instagram, it's Disabled Birth Stories Pod. On Facebook, it's Disabled Birth Stories Podcast. And then TikTok is Disabled Birth Pod. And then we're on wherever you find podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast, will be Disabled Birth Stories.
Great. Well, I thank you so much for shining a light on this issue. It is so incredibly important. And I love hearing about people who see a need for their community and fill the need. So I'm sure that any person who has discovered your podcast and felt like there was nobody representing them or telling their stories in the birth community instantly feels a sense of relief and connection. And so I'm so thankful for the work that you are doing.
Thank you so much. I love doing it.
Did hearing this episode make you think of somebody that you know who is disabled and a parent, or disabled and hoping to become a parent, or perhaps they have a chronic illness that needs specific accommodations? Send it to them. That is how we grow the word about the show. And of course, send them Kelsey's Disabled Birth Stories podcast. Well, and with that, if you are looking to have more conversations about the topics that you hear on the Milk Making Minutes, then go right to Facebook and join my Milk Making Minutes community group. It is a growing group where we have discussions about the things that make feeding our babies so difficult. This group is open to anyone who cares about reducing these barriers, not just to people currently feeding their babies.